Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, we've got quite the important week coming up for Diablo 4 here, and if you aren't tuned into the game's social media accounts, you may well have no idea that any of this is even in the pipeline. So let's break down all the news going on within the game itself, as well as any tweets from the developers that tell us anything of note coming up for the game, an update on the blood drive that they've been running, and then finally there is an article recently published in Forbes that I think we should probably have a bit of a talk about. As well, it's worth noting for everyone here that I'm a little bit under the weather, so if my voice sounds a little bit off, that's why. Don't worry about it, I'm fine. The news waits for no one. Starting off with the most relevant things first, then we did have a hotfix hit the game late last night. It didn't do a whole lot, but it's always good to keep tabs on these type of things, and the changes here are quite simply a fix to living steel chests sometimes being able to be looted multiple times by a singular player, and then also fixing the title that drops for completing the season journey. Past that, some decent news: Mother's Blessing is returning to Sanctuary in just a couple of days. From November 20th until the 27th, which is a full week, all players will be getting a significant gold and experience bonus. They did this once in Season 1 as well, but it was at a much less relevant time in the season at the end of August. It only lasted for 4 days instead of 7, and it also only boosted experience and gold gain by 25%, rather than this one now, which is up to 35%. It's important to mention too that with the previous changes to how experience bonuses stack with each other, this is going to be worth even more than it says on the tin. So expect both experience and gold to be absolutely flowing in for an entire week, starting just a couple of days from now. This is absolutely perfect for a few things. First, and most obviously, getting yourself to level 100. If you aren't there yet, this is the perfect time to get that bit of extra playtime in, as it will be at least 35% more rewarding for the time that you spend doing so. It's also worth mentioning, of course, that Abattoir of Zir is happening at the beginning of December, which will require you to be max level to even have a chance, so there's definitely a reason to do it at this point as well. This also applies to anyone with ults or secondary characters. Maybe you don't even have one of them yet, but you are interested in finally getting to try out like a ball lightning sorcerer in Season 2, for example, but just couldn't be bothered to level up again. Well, now you have a full week coming up where leveling will be so much faster, then it just makes it so enticing to at least try something new out. On top of that, with the gold gain bonus, even people just normally playing the game will see a very welcome increase, as while gold isn't lacking this season by any means, you can never really have too much of it, that's for sure. On top of this, the timing of this gold and experience bonus event is lining up really well with a sale for the game going on right now in the Battle.net store, where all versions of it are 40% off. So if you know anyone who wants to play the game but doesn't have it yet, maybe just let them know about this. Especially with all the changes that came in with Season 2 and beyond, getting the game at 40% off might well be enough to get some people to try it out who passed on it originally. All I know is the price is pretty well reduced, so we might as well tell people about it if there's anyone interested. The main thing that all of this is particularly good for too is preparing everyone for the Abattoir of Zir, so there is actual incentive to take an advantage of this event period as well. And on that note, we actually had a couple of small bits of information that actually came from Woody Joe, well-known Diablo creator, who talked to the developers and got to even play a bit of Abattoir of Zir at BlizzCon, and there were two main takeaways that I had from what he had to say. The first is that the developers intend for tier 25 of this event, the maximum tier, to not be completable by players, like at all in the first place. They do not intend for anyone to reach that point, not a single player, not ball lightning sorcerers, not combo point bugged rogue, not one-shot hammer the ancients barbarian, no one. Whether that actually comes to play or not, then we will have to see, but it's worth being aware that this is the intended difficulty scaling of that event. The other part of this seems to be, while monsters do scale up in levels in later tiers of the event, the thing that scales the most is their health, not their damage, meaning that a properly defensive build will likely be able to survive in higher tiers of the event without too much problem, but it is the timer on the event that will cause you issues and cause you to fail at higher tiers above all else. Past that, we have a proper announcement of all of the cosmetics coming with the Midwinter Blight event coming on December 12th, directly from the Diablo social media itself last night. This actually dropped, and if you have been keeping up on news, you may have already seen some of these items, at least as far as how they look on their tooltips, but this is just how all of them will actually look in-game on our characters, and they're actually pretty nice now that we can see them all in action too. I don't have any issues with these, I think they're nice, but you know, it's just a sort of bonus event. It's not really anything that you should expect too massive of a thing from. Moving on then, we just have some bug reports and acknowledgements. This player mentions a bug where they get repeatedly kicked to character select when trying to log into seasonal characters of any kind that is just completely keeping them from playing the game. It mentions that this is still an ongoing issue even after the recent patch and the hotfix, so Adam Fletcher, Global Community Development Director, asked for their battle tag to have a look into it. If you are having similar issues to this player, it may be worth sending Adam your battle tag as well as letting them know that it's happening for you so that they can find this issue faster and then also solve it faster. I know for anyone who's just being straight up blocked from playing completely, it must suck quite a bit, so hopefully this gets fixed sooner rather than later. Aside from that, we have the real-life blood harvest event that Diablo is running. Donate some blood in the United States and report it on their custom website for the event, and you build towards the overall goal of 660 66 pints of blood. At 33%, we had a set of cosmetic weapons that will be unlocked for all players. At 66%, there was a full-on cosmetic armor set for players, and at 100%, a full horse. Not even just horse armor, but a living, breathing horse, which I expect them to deliver to all of us in real life, not just in-game. As of this moment, we are in fact past 100%, and that means the entire player base will receive all of these cosmetic things that I just mentioned in the game on the 22nd of November, just in a few days. But also, it unlocks the special secondary part of this marketing event, which is a sweepstakes, which has now begun for a brand new custom PC that is liquid cooled by actual human blood. Yeah, you heard that right. Not to mention, it is an absolute beefcake of a PC with an i9 processor and an RTX 4090. It'll absolutely get the job done as far as any current video game that you can imagine playing on it. This thing is really cool as well, so you should check out the sweepstakes yourself to see the requirements to sign up for it. But no, you did not have to donate blood for this, so you can actually still take part in the second stage regardless. It is much more open than it might have been otherwise. So why not put your hat in the ring for a chance at an extremely powerful and cool looking brand new PC, right? Though I realize in saying this to all of you here, I immediately have lowered my own chances of winning.
This is why we can't have nice things.
And with all that, let's move on to something on which I have quite mixed opinions, which is this article about Diablo 4 from Paul Tassi at Forbes, who we've talked about before as he has covered Diablo 4 a fair amount since its launch. The title of the article, Diablo 4 has become way too overhated at this point. Starting right from there, I disagree with the wording of it. I think a more accurate headline would be something like Diablo 4 deserves a second chance, or Diablo 4 is better than you thought it was, but the current title is definitely a bit off for me. That aside, then, he goes on to talk about Diablo 4 in relation to Game Awards, how a lot of people are surprised to see that Diablo 4 still has a 91 rating on Metacritic after how vocal the community seemed to be about disliking it. He then says that he believes most of the people who dislike the game are upset about two main things that have already been more or less fixed, and that the idea of Diablo 4 launching as a flop or a miss is absolutely not true. He does then mention that the microtransactions are atrocious, and we definitely do agree on that front, but let's go back a moment here. This article's headline calls the game overhated, but then in the opening paragraph mentions that the game is sitting at a 91 on Metacritic. That immediately is a contradiction in itself, but oftentimes the writer of an article is not responsible for the headline. That's more of an editor thing, but it still creates an immediate issue for me here. As well, the writer talks about how he believes there are two main missteps that have been mostly corrected, but he doesn't really explain what those missteps are, so I don't really know what he's specifically talking about because there are some pretty big issues here. The idea of Diablo 4 launching and not being a flop or a miss is, well, mostly true. The game was very successful on launch. As much as we all have had tons of complaints, the campaign itself was extremely well made and very enjoyable the whole way through, with absolute top-tier cinematics and solid voice acting throughout too. But the game immediately fell short once you finish the campaign. While I respect that a campaign is the most important thing in a number of video games, that is simply not the case in a Diablo game, in an ARPG in general, because while every player will do the campaign, it will be such a small portion of your game time in the long run because of the grindy nature of the genre as a whole. And so while it is an important first impression and lasting legacy, if the story is great but everything else falls flat, you have a real problem in an ARPG, definitely not what I would call a minor misstep. Moving on from this, Paul says similar things about the story, about how excellent it is, and yeah, as I said, I do agree with all that, but the thing is, this is not a single-player game. It isn't even a game where the story is intended to take you to the maximum level you can reach, so story being great is fantastic, but you have to consider the genre that you're in. On top of that, he compares it saying previous Diablo game stories were basically just a throwaway vessel to get to the endgame session, and one, that's pretty disrespectful to previous Diablo games which have had fun stories, and two, yeah, that's sort of the point I think you're missing. Yes, the story is great, but in an action RPG, a story is supposed to be a vessel to get you to the endgame. As good as the story is, if the endgame doesn't work, the game doesn't actually achieve its goals. Following that, the writer goes into talking about the quote-unquote bad era of Diablo 4, which started with a giant nerf patch. Supposedly, this is probably referring to 1.1.0, which released right before Season 1 and completely changed how the game worked on a fundamental level that made players feel significantly weaker in comparison to the game around us. And yes, that genuinely did ruin it for a ton of people, and a lot of people stopped playing completely within days of the start of Season 1, with a number of people even refusing to try the season until the nerfs were rolled back. But the thing is, yes, that is the bad period of Diablo 4. Sure, it is the lowest point, but you can't let that overshadow every other issue that has plagued this game until now. This game did not release in a finished, acceptable state for what it claimed to be and what it wanted to be either. Stash space has been a problem since launch. Loadouts for builds are something players have been asking for ages. Hell, it's easy to forget that during Season 2, with it being fixed at launch, resistances, which is like an entire massive part of the game as a whole, and the calculations of damage, essentially half of your defensive effectiveness as a player, that whole system was broken. It did not work, and it took until Season 2 to get it fixed. Yes, we can be happy that it works now, but that does not excuse that it took them 4 months to do it. On top of this, 1.1.0 wasn't even the first big nerf patch that we got as players. There was also a pretty massive one just 2 days after the release of Early Access, just most people didn't even recognize it as it affected endgame builds more than anything, and that early on in the game, the only people that were at that point were the people racing to hit level 100. They were the only one far enough along to actually feel those changes, and by all accounts, that itself was also a big nerf. And things like activating a nightmare sigil, teleporting you instantly into a nightmare dungeon, that make the game feel a lot better now, but it's important to remember that while it seems like such a simple concept, it didn't get added into the game until multiple weeks into Season 1. Not even before that massive nerf patch happened, it happened after the nerfs. They decided the nerfs were more important than the things that would make the game feel better. Same with mob density increases in various areas of the game, that was added in after all of those nerfs. There have been a ton of changes to fix the game and bring it into a playable state, the state that it's in now, including a full-on 40% increase in experience gain, which shows that they definitely got the original numbers a fair bit off what they probably should have been. And that's the thing. Right now, as of Season 2, I am more than happy to recommend the game as it is currently to anyone who likes this kind of experience, especially with it on sale right now. Whether new or someone who quit a few months ago and is considering coming back, it is in a solid and enjoyable place right now that I think people should check out. But that does not excuse the months and months that it took to get here. As of right now, Diablo 4, released as a bit of a mess, stayed that way with minor fluctuations until Season 1 happened, which was a catastrophe, and it took about a month from then until the actual buff patches mentioned in this article, which is important to mention, which didn't even bring us back up to the power level we were before the nerfs. Then, not much really changed until Season 2, when everything pretty much just sort of got a lot better, and that's my issue here. The game has been in a subpar or worse state from its release until the start of June when that happened, until Season 2 started mid-October. It has been a good month, fun, playable since then, but not perfect by any means since then either, which has literally only been a month. Filled with problems for 4 months, decent place for 1 month. If we just excuse the past of this game because of the present of this game, then game companies will keep doing this, releasing unfinished games, getting their pile of money from it, and then just slowly fixing it at their own pace, not really in a rush, and they'll eventually reach a proper product. They don't care, they already got their money. It's not the first time, it won't be the last time, and immediately saying that we should forgive and forget the past because they have it about 80% fixed up now is just so wrong. We can say, hey, give the game a try now. It's in a much better place than it was. But saying the game is overhated, saying any resentment that players have is undeserved, and importantly to me, talking about how it deserves to be rewarded in gaming awards ceremonies? Sure, the story is good, and you know what? I wouldn't complain if it got an award for story or voice acting and performance, I guess. But no, I don't think it is anywhere close to worthy of Game of the Year, regardless of the stacked list this year, because that would mean admitting that we as gamers think something that ate our money, releasing with really solid story, on top of an unfinished and problematic product as a whole, then taking 4 months to get that product to an enjoyable state again, as something that we value above all other games that release this year. And that is just a disgusting concept for me to even consider. Best RPG is also not gonna cut it, and neither is best multiplayer to me, simply because it doesn't innovate enough as an RPG, and half of those RPG mechanics are the things that were busted and needed fixing. Best multiplayer is okay-ish to me as a concept, but I still think that forgets a lot of the earlier issues that shouldn't be forgotten. I will say I am not against forgiving developers or companies that turn something around like this, but I think there is a big difference between saying the game is better now, give it a try, and saying that we should all just put the way the game came out and the 4 months before they got it feeling genuinely alright to play, and just forget about it. The campaign was good, so we should forget about the end game from before. But we can't do that. We have to remember it, because if we don't, we are chumps. We are fools waiting to get played again. We can forgive, but we can't forget, or else we're doomed to repeat the process. Yeah, that's a bit dramatic to say about a video game, maybe, but I'm passionate about this. Developers can and should be commended for what they've done the last couple of months to fix this game up. They've done a very good job at taking what the game was and turning it into what it is now. But that doesn't mean that I'm willing to give give Game of the Year to Diablo 4, not even Best RPG, because we cannot forget the 4 months that transpired before that. 4 months. That's about it then, everyone. I got into a bit of a rant in the end there, but I saw that article, and no offense to the writer of the article by any means, but I think I have a fair amount more game time with Diablo 4 than he probably does, given that I am an absolute degenerate who does this way too much, and he seems to have his life somewhat put together. So I thought I should share my thoughts on the situation from the perspective of someone who has spent a hell of a lot of time in the endgame of Diablo 4 at launch, in Season 1, and now also in Season 2. Let me know your own thoughts on all of this down below in the comments, and also, hey, if you're excited to maybe try out a new class and take advantage of the XP and gold boost coming in a couple of days too, why not? Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.